Hi everybody, I'm David.
And I'm Paul.
And we're with the DiceyReview.com.
And tonight we're going to be looking at the 1 to 4 player game Noria from Stronghold Games and Edition Spielweis. To begin setup, place the board in the middle of the table.
Next, you'll take all of the island tiles and shuffle them together and place out either 5, 6, or 7 depending on your player count. For a 2-player game, we'll be using 5 island tiles. Place them on the designated spot on the game board and place the rest back in the box.
Next, place 4 of the politician cubes above the tracks. When you're done placing the politician cubes above the chambers, it should look like this.
Next, you'll place your round markers face down on the round track, going down to the spot designated for the number of players that you have for your game. Since we're setting up for a 2-player game, we'll go all the way to the last round marker on the round marker track. Once you're done setting up, it should look like this.
Next, you will place 4, 5, or 6 of the discs on the designated spaces in the market. In a 2-player game, we'll place 4 discs. The energy, obsidian, and mycelium discs can be placed in any order in the top 3 spaces. The bottom spaces have a value assigned to them. For the first game, the recommended setup is placing the city, journey, tool, and bonus discs as shown here.
Next, you'll place your energy, obsidian, mycelium, and knowledge resource tokens next to the board within reach of all players. Then, you will place your warehouse and ship tokens next to the board within reach of all players as well. Each player will receive a plastic base and a player aid. They will also receive a small, medium, and large ring. The rings will be placed on the player base like so. It's important to pay attention to the alignment of the rings. This is the correct alignment for the starting position.
For the first game, the rulebook recommends placing the discs in the rings in the shown order. You'll place the city, journey, and tool discs in the top, middle, and bottom rings in the exact order shown. The 3 resource discs, the energy, mycelium, and obsidian, will be placed in these exact spaces, but each player's order will need to be different. This would be an example of a different player's rings, with the resource discs placed in a different order.
Each player will receive a tableau and 7 warehouse tokens in their player color. The warehouse tokens will be placed on the illustrated spaces on the tableau. Each player will also receive 5 representative tokens in their player color.
One of the representatives will be placed on the small island on the board. This representative is known as your ambassador.
Each player will then place their remaining representative tokens in the cave area of the board.
Each player will also receive 1 knowledge token and 1 resource of their choice. This player has chosen mycelium. And they will also receive 1 of each ship. After this, you can place any remaining wheels, factories, representatives, and tableaus back into the box if you're playing with 2 or 3 players. Next, each player will place 1 of their representatives on one of the 4 paths. This placement during setup is free. According to the rulebook, the player who needs to let off the most steam receives the smokestack and is the first player. Alternatively, you can decide this randomly. We're now ready to play the game, but before we go into the details of each phase and the different actions that you can take, it's important to explain a few basic principles.
The way that players will score points in this game is by moving cubes into any one of the 6 chambers to increase the point value of that chamber. 4 of the chambers are associated with score multiplier tracks. Depending on the level that players are able to get their representatives to on that track by using resources or goods, it can multiply their points for that track. We'll explain how both of these things are done in more detail later on. At the end of the game, each chamber will be worth as many points as the lowest number that is visible in that chamber. In this example, the chamber is worth 6 points, and since the yellow player was able to move their representative to the 3rd level, this chamber will be worth 6 times 3 points, or 18 points for the yellow player. We feel like it's important to point out that in this example, the numbers on the right are the cost in resources or goods to achieve that level. The number on the left is the level and point modifier that that player was able to achieve in that track.
There are also 2 chambers that are not associated with one of the 4 paths. They are, however, affected by the level that your representatives have achieved. The top chamber is the specialization chamber. This chamber will give you points for the highest level that your representative has achieved. This chamber is currently worth 2 points, as 2 is the lowest visible number. The bottom chamber is the division chamber. The division chamber will give players points for the lowest level one of their representatives has achieved. It's important to note that if a player still has a representative in the cave, the number that they multiply by is 0. The actions that a player will take on their turn are driven by the wheel and the discs that are distributed in it. Each disc will allow a specific action. The lower half of a player's wheel is known as the active half, and only discs within the active half can be activated on a player's turn. A player can activate 0 to 3 discs on their turn. Activating a disc will allow you to use an action. Discs have a normal side and an upgraded side. Upgraded discs will allow you to take 2 of the depicted actions. If a player has multiple upgraded discs that they could use on their turn, they are only allowed to use 1 upgraded disc to take 2 actions. The other upgraded disc can still be used, but it can only be used to take 1 action. A player is allowed to take 4 total actions on their turn. They can never exceed this number.
Each disc must be on a different level of the wheel to be activated during the same turn.
There are 4 activation paths on a player's wheel. A player can choose to activate any discs within these activation paths, and they can be activated in any order. So for instance, a player could choose the activation path that is highlighted. They could activate the city disc, followed by the mycelium disc, followed by the obsidian disc, or any combination of that order. The discs can be activated in any order the player chooses. So for instance, if this player chooses the activation path highlighted, they could activate any combination of the city, journey, or tool discs. A game of Noria will last either 16, 15, or 14 rounds depending on the player count. A round will always begin by the start player removing the bottommost round marker, revealing its multiplier side, and then placing it near the playing area. If resources or knowledge begin to run low, these multiplier tokens can be used to indicate 10 of any resource or knowledge. For instance, placing this 10 on top of this energy would indicate that the player has 10 of this given resource. Each turn consists of 4 phases that are executed one after the other.
The first phase is the influence phase. This phase is optional. There are 2 special actions that can be taken on the influence phase. The first is the night shift. During the night shift, a player may pay knowledge to rotate either the middle or the largest ring of their wheel. So for example, paying 1 knowledge, a player could rotate their middle ring like this, or the largest ring like this. A player may take this action as many times as they want. Every time they do, the knowledge cost doubles. The other action that can be taken during the influence phase is manipulation. For this action, a player will pay 2 knowledge to exchange discs on their ring. A player may either move a disc from one spot on their ring to any other open spot on their ring, or they may swap the position of 2 of the discs on their ring. Like the night shift action, the manipulation action may be taken as many times as a player wants, but for every time they take it, the knowledge cost doubles.
One quick thing to mention is that when this round marker is removed in the game, both the night shift and the modification action will cost 1 more knowledge for each action taken.
Now that we've looked at the influence phase, let's look at the second phase, the action phase. During the action phase, a player will activate 0 to 3 of their discs. The first type of disc that can be activated is the bonus disc. A bonus disc must be activated before all other discs. Activating the bonus disc does not use one of your 4 actions. It gives an extra action to a selected disc. The player would first activate their bonus disc and then choose which of the other discs to give the extra action to. For instance, if the player chose this activation path, they could choose to either use the city disc or the mycelium disc 1 extra time. If the chosen disc is an upgraded disc, it can therefore be used up to 3 times. So in this example, if the player chooses this activation path, they could use their city disc 3 times and then their mycelium disc once, or they could use their mycelium disc twice and then their city disc twice. If a player activates an upgraded bonus disc, they can either give 1 disc 2 additional actions or 2 discs 1 additional action. So for instance, if the player chose to boost the mycelium disc with an upgraded bonus disc, they could use the mycelium disc 3 times. Alternatively, the player could use both the city disc and the mycelium disc an additional time. It's important to note that using an upgraded bonus disc does count as one of the available upgraded actions for your turn. So for instance, if this player used the bonus disc as an upgraded disc, they would not be able to use the city disc as an upgraded disc in the same turn.
The next type of disc that players can activate are resource discs. The player can activate an energy, obsidian, or mycelium disc to receive resources equal to the number of ships they have of that type. So in this example, if the player activated their energy disc, they would receive 2 energy. Or if the energy disc had been upgraded, they would receive 4 energy.
The next type of disc that can be activated is the journey disc. When a player activates a journey disc, they can move their ambassador to an island. When taking the journey action, a player can choose to place their ambassador on a previously revealed island or explore a new island. Whenever a player explores a new island, they will take the top tile from the island stack and place it face up within reach of all players. Once an island has been revealed, a player must travel to that location. When an island tile is revealed, a number of ships are placed on the island tile. The number and type of ships that are placed on the island is based on the icon on the bottom of the island. For instance, the icon on the left island shown indicates obsidian ships equal to 1 more than the player count. This is indicated by the blue arrow pointing up. The 2 ship icons on the island on the right indicate a mycelium ship equal to 1 less than the player count. This is indicated by the arrow pointing down. The ship icon in the middle indicates 2 ships less than the player count. We're playing a 2-player game. In a 2-player game, you will never place less than 1 ship. When a player visits an island, they have a choice between 2 different actions. The player can either take one of the available ship tiles and place it next to their tableau. In this instance, the player would be able to take one of the available obsidian ships. Alternatively, a player could place one of their factories on one of the indicated spaces at the top of the island. A player could choose any open space to place their factory. When a player places their factory on an open warehouse space, they gain the number of warehouses indicated by the squares on that space. So for instance, if a player placed a warehouse on this space, they would gain 2 of the fan warehouses to place next to their player tableau. So the player would take 2 of the indicated goods and then place them next to their player tableau. Warehouses have an empty side, shown here, and a full side. Whenever you're taking a warehouse, always place it on its empty side. It's important to note that if a player ever moves their ambassador to an island that is occupied by another player, they have to pay 1 resource to the bank. It's important to note that a player must pay 1 resource to the bank for every ambassador at a location that they travel to. If all of the ships are taken from a location, or all of the factory spaces have been filled, these actions can no longer be taken at this location.
The next type of disc a player could use on their turn is the tool disc. The tool disc can either be used to upgrade a disc on your wheel, or to fill warehouses. When upgrading a disc, the player will activate the tool disc and flip a disc on their wheel to its upgraded side. A player may not use a disc they have just upgraded in the same turn. It's important to note that a tool disc cannot upgrade itself, but you could use a separate tool disc to upgrade a different tool disc. Activating a tool disc can also be used to produce goods to fill warehouses. When producing goods, a player must pay the resource cost shown on the warehouse tile. A player may produce as many of one type of resource, or up to 1 of each different type of resource, as long as they can afford to pay the resource cost. So in this example, if the player has 5 mycelium and 2 obsidian, they could produce multiple sails or multiple compasses. They couldn't, however, produce multiple sails and a compass, or multiple compasses and a sail. They could, however, choose to produce 1 sail and 1 compass.
The last disc that can be activated is the city disc. When a player activates a city disc, they have a choice between 2 actions. The first action that can be taken using a city disc is a market action. To take a market action, a player would choose one of the discs in the market. The player would then move the disc to their wheel to be placed at the end of the round. The energy, obsidian, and mycelium discs are free. The 4 discs in the bottom half of the market cost a number of resources shown. So in this instance, the city disc would cost 1 resource, the journey disc would cost 2, the tool disc would cost 3, and the bonus disc would cost 4. These resources can be any type: energy, mycelium, or obsidian. When a player gains a disc from the market, they place the disc in the middle of their wheel. It can't be activated this round, and it will be placed at the end of the round in a phase that we'll discuss in a moment. The next action that can be taken by using a city disc is the investment action. When taking an investment action, a player can pay resources or goods to move 1 step higher on one of the available paths. A player can move on to the first level of a path if they don't have a representative there already, or if a player already has a representative on a path, they can move 1 step higher. A player must pay the indicated cost of the level they are wanting to move to. So for instance, if the red player were wanting to move to the next level of the obsidian path, they would have to pay 2 obsidian to the supply. In addition, a player will have to pay 1 additional resource for each representative that is ahead of them on a path. So for instance, the red player would have to pay the 2 required obsidian and then 1 additional resource of any type to increase to the next level on the obsidian path. After paying the resources, they're allowed to move. Some paths will allow players to pay different types of resources to move up. For instance, this representative from the red player could pay either 2 mycelium or 2 energy to move to the next level of this chosen path. It's important to note that if the next level of the path does not have the not equal to sign, the paid resources must be the same. So for instance, to move to the next path, the red player would have to pay either 2 energy or 2 mycelium. They couldn't mix the 2. The next level of the indicated path does have the not equal to sign. This simply means that the player would have to pay 3 total resources, and they have to be of 2 different types, either mycelium or energy. The paths on the right require goods to move up instead of resources. So for instance, the yellow player would have to pay 1 of the indicated goods to move to the next level of this track, 1 of the sails, propellers, or compasses. It's important to note that when moving up on the tracks that require goods, if there are representatives that are higher than your representative, you'll pay the required goods to move to the next level, and then 1 additional resource, just like with the other tracks. You don't have to pay an additional good. When paying goods, a player will flip a warehouse that has been filled to show that it is now empty. It's important to note that after paying the good, it's not returned to the supply, it's simply emptied, and it can be refilled on a later turn.
Another optional action that may be taken during the disc activation is called inspection. When performing an inspection, a player may skip 1 disc in their chosen activation path to gain 1 knowledge. Only 1 disc per ring can be skipped, and for each disc that is skipped, 1 knowledge is gained.
One last thing to mention is that a player can take an exchange action by visiting the black market before, in between, or after they activate their discs. This will allow them to exchange goods for knowledge or knowledge for resources at the black market. At any time during the action phase, a player can either empty 1 basic warehouse to gain 2 knowledge, they can empty an advanced warehouse to gain 3 knowledge, or they can pay 3 knowledge to the supply to gain 1 resource of any type.
The next phase is the politics phase. During the politics phase, a player may manipulate the cubes in the chambers by paying the number of cogs that have been revealed on the round tracker. For instance, it would currently cost a player 3 knowledge to manipulate a cube. After a player has paid the required knowledge, a player may take any cube and place it into the leftmost seat of a chamber. and take another cube that has not been placed in a seat yet and remove it from the game permanently. When doing this, a player may take cubes or move cubes from any chamber they wish. A player may take this action as many times as they want on their turn during the politics phase. Every time they do take the action, though, the cost is doubled.
The last phase in a player's turn is the administration phase. At the beginning of the administration phase, a player will gain knowledge equal to the revealed cogwheels on their factory tableau. As you can see in this example, this player has revealed 1 cogwheel, so they will gain 1 knowledge. Next, each player will rotate each ring on their wheel, starting with the smallest, then the medium ring, and lastly, the large ring. These rings will be rotated in a clockwise direction. As the last step of the administration phase, players will place any gained discs into their wheel. A player can place the disc in an open space in their wheel. A player can also place a disc in an occupied space. If a player wants to place a disc in an occupied space, they would remove the disc that is in the current location and place it back in the box, and then place the disc as normal. After the administration phase has been completed, play will pass to the next player in a clockwise direction.
Once the last round marker has been removed from the board, each player will get 1 more turn, and then the game ends.
At the end of the game, players will score each of the 6 chambers to determine their final score. So in this scoring example, the first path will be scored like this. The yellow player will receive 6 times 3 because they've achieved the 3rd level on this path. The red player would get 6 times 2. On the next path, the yellow player would receive 6 times 5 for achieving the 5th level, and the red player would receive 2 times 6 again. On the 3rd path, the red player would receive 4 times 3, and the yellow player would receive 2 times 3. And on the 4th path, the red player would receive 3 times 8, while the yellow player receives 2 times 8.
Finally, we'll score the specialization and division chambers. Since yellow has a representative on the 5th level, they will receive 5 times 4 points for the specialization chamber, while red will only receive 4 times 4 points. For the division chamber, yellow's lowest representative is on the 2nd level. Therefore, they will get 2 times 8. Red's lowest representative is also on the 2nd level, giving them 2 times 8 points for that level as well.
In our scoring example, the yellow player wins with 106 points, with the red player coming in second with 92 points. In the case of a tie, the player with the lowest number of warehouses and ships is the winner. If there's still a tie, the victory is shared. Alright everybody, thanks so much for watching. That was our video. We hope that it was helpful and we hope that it was informative.
Also, if you'd like to see more content from the Dicey Review, you can find our Board Game Geek Guild, our Facebook, our Instagram, and our Twitter at the Dicey Review. We'd also love it if you'd check out our podcast, the Dicey Review. You can get that wherever you get podcasts. You can also check out all the other content we have on our YouTube channel, the Dicey Review.
Thanks so much for watching. Until next time, we'll see you at the table.